Poison has been a thing in Dungeons & Dragons throughout each edition. Let's take a look at how it has changed from one edition to another, how it mechanically has worked. We're going to look at a few select magic items, and we're going to look at a few select creatures that have appeared in almost every edition and have something to do with poison and how they've changed. Greetings, YouTube! The Doctor is in. Dr. Urias Papers here, coming at you with another commentary on Dungeons and Dragons. And like I said in the intro, today we are going to be talking about poison. We are going to be talking about how poison started out in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So not 0E, but 1E. We're going to go through 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E, 5E, 5.24. We're going to look at the mechanics for it. We're going to look at a couple of select magic items. We're going to look at a couple of select creatures from each edition as well. But first, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a question or comment. And don't forget to hit that notification bell. All right. Here is page 20 of the 1979-1980 Dungeon Master's Guide from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And this is essentially the first page where poison appears. And these are the mechanics for poison. It's kind of just a little bit of the description of poisons. It gives our poison types, the onset for each poison, ingestive or insinuative, which is the contact poisons or the poisons that you can use with a weapon. Damage if you save, and then damage if you do not save. And you'll notice that several of these say death. So it was instantaneous death. And then the strength of the poison dictated what kind of bonus and what kind of bonus to your saving throw and what kind of chance you had at detecting the poison. So that was a thing back in Dungeons and Dragons. Now that was on page 20. Let's go to page 127, because on page 127 is where we see poison as an item that can be found by the players. It was part of the potions, and again, this is the first edition Dungeons & Dragons. It says, a poison potion is simply a highly toxic liquid in a potion flask. Typically, poison potions are odorless and colorless. Ingestion, introduction of the poison through a break in the skin, or possibly just skin contact will cause death. Poisons can be weak, so you get a bonus to your save. Average or deadly, you get a negative to your saving throw. Some poisons can be such that a neutralized poison spell will simply lower the toxicity level by 40%. That is, that it'll give you a bonus to the save. So poisons in first edition were generally deadly. So in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, they were generally deadly. That was the mechanic. You had a saving throw. Sometimes you got a bonus. Sometimes you got a penalty. And if you failed, you were dead. So, and this was one of the items. Now, there was another item, and we're going to look at this item throughout all the editions as well. And that item is on page 134. And here it is. It is the Staff of the Serpent. Now, in further editions, this is still a staff. Some editions it becomes a rod. So, it changes from edition to edition. But this one, so the adder strikes as a +1 weapon. It does 2 to 4 points of damage when it hits. Upon command, the head of the staff becomes that of an actual serpent, and it had an armor class and hit points. So you could kill it. The head remains for one full round when a hit is scored. It didn't seem like it did very much damage, but when a hit is scored, damage does not increase, but the victim must make a save versus poison with no penalty or no bonus, or be slain. So that was another phrase that you're dead. So here again, we see another example in first edition of I'm going to hit you and you're going to be dead. So if players got this, then it could be used to their benefit. However, if they were going up against somebody, several of the players could end up dead. Now, monsters also had poison in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Let's talk about that. We're going to highlight the first creature we're going to look at, and this creature does appear in future versions of the game. This creature here is the giant wasp. So it's at the very bottom here. You can see it's got an armor class of 4. Remember, the lower the armor class, the better. It's got 2 movement speeds. One of those is flying. It's got 4 hit dice. It has 2 attacks, one with a bite, one with a sting or its tail, and that one is the one that has the poison. And here we see that a giant wasp attacks with both its powerful jaws and its poison sting. It can use the latter weapon repeatedly. Any victim of a sting must save versus poison or become permanently paralyzed, with death occurring in 2 to 5 days unless a neutralized poison spell or antidote is applied. So this one did not kill you right out. It paralyzed you permanently, which means that you needed to get some kind of enumeration, some kind of spell that would, or healing or something that would stop that particular effect from happening. That's the paralysis. And then you were dead a couple of days later. So less than a week later, you would be dead. So again, and this is a relatively low-level creature. It wasn't a super high creature. You can see up above was the vampire, who was a pretty powerful creature. But this creature was relatively kind of middle of the road. And it had something that if it stung you, if it hit, and you failed that save, no penalty, no bonus, you were done. You were out of combat, and you were out of combat permanently until the party could do something about it. So that was pretty much a dire situation. All right, the next creature that we're going to look at, and I'm not really doing these in alphabetical order. I just kind of picked them out of my head. The next creature we're going to look at that does appear in every single edition is the purple worm. Again, you can see this creature has a number of attacks of 1 and 1, which really is 2. It does a bite and it does a sting. And if we look at this, the sting causes 2 to 8 points of damage when it hits, and if the victim fails a poison saving throw, it is killed by the purple worm's poison. So no penalty, no bonus to that saving throw. You are just outright killed. And that is one of the things that made the purple worm very much something that people feared in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. All right, the last creature we're going to look at is the wyvern, and the wyvern is on page 102. Oh, I have to actually turn it over here. 102. We're not really doing these in any order whatsoever at all. Okay, here is the wyvern from the first edition monster manual. So this creature has a bite and a sting, and it says poison. And in here it says, any creature struck by this tail must save versus poison or die. Even if the victim makes a saving throw, they take 1 to 6 points of damage. So, and then note that the tail is very long and mobile, easily striking over the back of the wyvern to hit an opponent before its front. Because front facing was a little bit of a thing in first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. But again, here is this thing in first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons where we've now looked at 3 creatures and 1 magic item. And the poison from each one of them will kill you if you fail the saving throw. No penalty to the saving throw, no bonus to the saving throw. But again, and this was not necessarily a middle of the road creature. So the giant wasp was more or less a middle of the road creature. It wasn't something you were going to throw at first level characters, but maybe like 4th or 5th level characters. But the wyvern definitely was something that you would throw at like 7th or 8th level characters. And again, if it hit and that person failed their saving throw versus poison, that was it. So there was a table. You looked up your class and your level, and it told you what you needed to get to pass that saving throw. So, and there was always that chance that you were going to roll a 1, and that in that case, you were just gone. You were just done. All right. So, in the Dungeon Master's Guide in 2nd edition, so this is 2nd edition now, 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons or Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, however you want to say it. So this is page 101. This is the poison page, and we get, again, it's a very similar mechanic where there are different classes of poison, A through P. Some of them are injected, some of them are contact, some of them are ingested. And they do different things. There's different onsets. So the one that is probably the worst in this was type Class E because it was immediate. And so on the strength part, the number or the result before the the bar here is the result if you fail your save. And so E was death. And if you passed your save, the number 20 here was how much damage you took. And so they kept kind of this damage or death type of mechanic that came along with poisons, and this carried over from first edition. So they didn't really nerf it. In my opinion, poison has gotten nerfed with each edition of Dungeons and Dragons. So this is the list, and they have just the general description of the poisons and the method and the onset and what kinds of things can have poison. But this was the core of the poison rules in 2nd edition. So if we go now to page 103, here is death from poison. And this was a new mechanic that was not really in 1st edition. And it says poison remains effective for 2 to 6 hours after the death of the victim. If the character is raised during this time, some method must be found to neutralize the poison before the character is restored to life. That is bad. If it's not done then you're going to be making some saving throws for poison. You must immediately roll a saving throw versus poison, suffer all the effects of the poison in his body. So you could raise somebody. If the poison was still there and you didn't know it, they would have to make a saving throw, and if they failed that saving throw, obviously they could be killed outright. So that was a thing as well. And then let's go to page 194, because that is where the poison was listed in the items themselves, which was Appendix 3. So these are all the potions. And it can be typically they're odorless, and they can be of any color. And poisons can be weak, which gave a bonus. They can be average or deadly. This is all the same kind of language from the 1st edition Dungeons & Dragons, but they now tie this to that table 51. So the DM selects the strength of poison desired, although most are J. And J would be what? Let's go back to 101. And J, no, it was... Yeah, it was 101. Okay, that's where we want to go. Yeah, and J was ingested, 1 to 4 minutes, death, and 20 points. So if you drank that potion, that's what you got. That's the result that you got. So that was the poison. That was the potion of poison. Very similar, except now it ties it to this kind of strength numeric that was there. In addition to that, we have the Staff of the Serpent, which we saw in 1st edition. And again, it's +1 weapon. It does 2d2 points of damage when it hits, which is 2 to 4. Upon command, you can make it an actual serpent. The head remains for 1 full turn, and a turn is different in 1st and 2nd edition than it was in later edition. So that was like 10 minutes. When a hit scored, damage is not increased, but the victim must roll a successful saving throw versus poison, strength E, or be slain. And remember, E was, if you failed it, it was death. If you passed it, it was 20 points of damage. So again, this is a thing. And it also, this was added in there, only evil priests will employ an adder staff. The snake's head is killed, the staff is destroyed. Neither staff has nor requires charges. Most of these staves are pythons. So some of them are pythons, and some of them are adders. So that was a thing. You could come across an evil cleric who had one of these, and they could slap it against your head, and then you'd be dead from the poison. So that's 2nd edition. That was the items. Now let's look at the 2nd edition creatures. So giant wasp, this was in a big kind of table of all the insects, and we got giant wasp down here, which is similar to giant hornet, which is right here. Giant wasp had more hit dice, and it did the 2d8 plus 1d4, which is a sting. And it says here that it's the venom carried by the wasp is identical to that of the giant hornet. Okay. A failed saving throw versus poison causes an additional 5d6 points of damage and 2d6 hours of paralyzation. So that was essentially, well, this is nerfed a bit from the Giant Wasp from first edition. Remember, the Giant Wasp from first edition permanently paralyzed you and killed you after 2 to 5 days. Now, it's only paralyzing you for 2 to 6 hours, and it's only doing some additional damage. That's it. So that's a nerf to that. Now, let's take a look at the second edition Purple Worm, which is on page 364. Okay, here's the Purple Worm, and we got, this is in the worm, so they kind of categorized a lot of creatures into one category, and then there were multiple creatures. So the Purple Worm is a worm, along with the Giant Bloodworm, the Bookworm, and the Rock Grub. And a Purple Worm, let's see, the worm attacks by biting. An attack roll that exceeds the required hit by 4 or more will devour you. And then the worm has a stinger on its tail. Anyone hit by the stinger suffers 2 to 4 points of damage and must make a successful saving throw versus poison or be slain instantly. So that one stayed the same. That was an instant slaying. Again, first and second edition, poison was very, very deadly. So let's look at the Wyvern now, who is just a couple pages further from Worm. Here's the Wyvern. Not a lot changed in the stat block itself, but the Wyvern has a stinger. Let's see, large. Use of its stinger, attacking the most convenient target. The tail is very mobile. The stinger injects poison type F into the wound against which the victim must make a saving throw versus poison or die. So if we go back here, and we go back to page 101, F was immediate death or 0 hit points of damage. So it's injected, it comes off immediately. If you fail that save, you're dead. Otherwise, you just take 0 hit points of damage. So the Giant Wasp got nerfed a bit from first to second edition. The Purple Worm essentially stayed the same, and the Wyvern essentially stayed the same, except they fit the Wyvern into this category, whereas the Purple Worm was just too bad, so sad, you are going down like a clown. Okay, now third edition, and I've got I've got pictures from my third edition book here. So here are the poison rules in third edition, and they just kind of give a general description of it, and then there's a table here that's on the next page that that has a list of all the poisons. And again, it's essentially the same mechanic. You get exposed to it, you have to make a saving throw, and then there's an effect. So let's look at the next page here. So this is just a general description, and here's that table. And now, instead of categorizing poisons as like a type, which was a first edition and a second edition, we've got actual names for all the poisons, like Bloodroot or Blue Winnis or Nitharot or Dragon Bile or Terranov Root, or Oil of Taggart, things like that. Idmos, Arsenic, Lich Dust. So it says what kind it is, injury, the saving throw now, and this would have been a fortitude save. So they changed the saving throws from first and second edition to third edition. Third edition had reflex saves, fortitude saves, and will saves. This would have been a fortitude save. So it says injury, so you could put this on a weapon. You contact, you could put it like smear it on an object, or ingested or inhaled. And those are all self-explanatory. And then they go up by strength with their saving throws. So like Purple Worm Poison was a DC 24 fortitude save. Now, the damage is different. You don't see death in this list. So there is an initial damage that the character immediately takes upon failing a saving throw. And then there's a secondary damage, which they take a minute after exposure. So here's the initial damage. So if we look at Purple Worm Poison on here, it's 1d6 strength damage. So that means your strength was lowered. And then the secondary was strength damage. So in this, it's not death. And so if we look at things like let's not look at a creature, look at Shadow Essence. So injury 17, 1 strength, 2d6 strength. So now it was strength and the party had to deal with something different. So instead of just outright killing you, all of this looks like either just straight out damage, paralysis, or attribute damage. And the characters had to deal with the attribute damage in some way. So that is a new mechanic that was introduced in 3rd edition. All right, so when we go into the magic items that we look at, we're looking at the Viper Rod now. And now it's no longer called the Staff of the Adder or the Staff of the Serpent. This is the Viper Rod. The rod strikes as a +1 heavy mace once per day. Upon command, the head of the rod can become that of an actual serpent for 10 minutes. During this period, any successful strike with the rod deals normal damage and poisons the creature. Hit. The poison deals 1d10 points of temporary constitution damage immediately. Fortitude negates DC 14. And another 1d10 points of temporary constitution damage 1 minute later. Fortitude negates DC 14. So what that meant is that it's temporary, which means you get, like, I think it was like 1 point back a day or something. So again, the previous stabs just outright kill. If you hit and you fail to save, you're dead. Now, if you hit and you fail to save, you take constitution damage. Now, in 3rd edition, if you went to 0 con, you were dead. So that was a thing. Let's make sure that you guys can see this whole table here. I want to pull that out a little bit. Okay, so let's go to the next thing here. And this is our vermin poison list. And it comes from the Monster Manual. So they've got a list of all the vermin. Now they're categorized as vermin. And we've got Giant Wasp on here, which is a DC 18 Fortitude save. And now initial and secondary damage is not permanent paralysis. It's not paralysis for a number of hours. It's not death. It's dex damage. So it does 1d6 dex damage for a failure on the initial and a failure on the second. And it's temporary damage, so you get it back. So again, a bit, this mechanic as a whole was more of a nerf to poisons than instant death. All right, so let's look at the next one. Here's the purple worm. It's from the book. I took a picture, so it's a little bit skewed, but here it is. And this beast was nasty. It was really nasty, and you did not want to fight this. But it had a challenge rating. This is the first time challenge ratings were introduced. And it had a lot of hit points, 200 hit points, a really bad initiative. AC now, this is where they flipped AC, where the higher the AC, the better it was for the creature. Now, this creature had a poison sting, so damages by bite and sting and poison. And so let's take a look at that. In combat, poison, sting, fortitude save DC 24. Initial damage was 1d6 temporary strength damage. Secondary was 2d6 temporary strength damage. So you could lose strength. So again, 1st edition and 2nd edition Purple Worm just slew you. You were done, dead. Now, this is a nerf. You're not dead anymore. You are now losing strength. And if you went to 0 strength, you essentially were paralyzed. So that was a thing. And let's take a look at the Wyvern now. And here's the Wyvern. And this creature, I mean, this is pretty much on par with the Wyvern from 1st and 2nd edition for a lot of the stats in here. It had a sting, a bite, 2 wings. So it had 4 attacks or 2 claws. And the sting did some damage, and it had poison. So let's take a look at that. That's on the next page here. Here it is right here. Poison. Sting. Fortitude save, DC 17, fort save. Initial and secondary damage was 2d6 temporary constitution damage. So if you went to 0, you died, but it's temporary constitution. So if you didn't go to 0, you got one of those points back at a certain interval, or you could get them back with a spell or a magic item or a potion. So this was a new problem that players had to deal with. It still was bad. That was a very bad problem. Somebody freaked out if they lost a whole bunch of Constitution, because that means they could lose Constitution again. If this thing attacked them a couple of times, they could actually go to 0. But it wasn't instant death right away. The look on a player's face in 1st and 2nd edition when they got stung by a wyvern and they failed their save, and it was, well, what happened? Well, you died. That was a look of shock. The look on a player's face here was less of shock, and it was, well, oh my God, you guys need to do something about this right now. But it wasn't, oh my God, I just got killed, everybody watch out. And, and players knew in 1st and 2nd edition, poison was very bad. It wasn't as bad in 3rd edition, but it was still very bad. All right, so now we're going to go to 4th edition, which is, I know, everybody's favorite. Here's the description of poison in 4th edition. Poison can be applied with a weapon or to a trap, to darts, and it's got just the general description of it. And then they had a whole page in the book. This is from the player's handbook of a bunch of different poisons. They got Black Lotus poison in here, Insanity Mist, Pit Toxin, Dark Toxin, and things had attack values in 4th edition. So this was a different mechanic. So it had, like, Dark Toxin was a plus 13 to your Fortitude defense. So you had 4 defenses in 4th edition. You had an armor class, you had a fort defense, you had a will defense, and you had a reflex defense. And everything attacked one of those defenses. So this would attack that. 13, if I got it, then you would take 5 ongoing damage and a save and that. And a saving throw in 4th edition was a simple roll of a d20 and a 10 or better saved and a 1 through 9 failed. But you did it every round. So again, you don't really see any like complete just death. A lot of it's like ongoing poison damage, like Carrion Crawler Brain Juice. The target is immobilized instead of slowed. Save ends, which is every round. Black Lotus, plus 20 to Fortitude while bloody. That means half hit points. The target uses standard action each round to make a basic attack against the nearest creature, so they kind of went crazy. Blood of Zahir, 10 ongoing damage and daze. Save ends both. Dro Poison was weakened. Pit Toxin, plus 28 versus Fortitude, 15 ongoing poison damage and weakened. So this was a pretty big nerf because odds were that you were going to save against that really soon. Now, 4th edition was more of a round-to-round game instead of a long-term game. And it was very much a round-to-round game. So, the combats were very... A lot of people like to say they were very much like a video game, but they were very strategic, like a war game, and things did go round to round. So this was the list of poisons that was in the DMG. So as far as the magic items go, there was no Staff of the Serpent that I know of in 4th edition. If anybody knows there was, leave it in the comments, but I don't think there was a Staff of the Serpent at all. Now, we did get the Purple Worm. So and one thing I did like about 4th edition with the monsters is they had different versions of the monsters. So like here we have 2 versions of a Purple Worm. We have the Purple Worm and we have the Elder Purple Worm, which is great. So that's a more powerful version of the Purple Worm. There were like 6 different kinds of orcs and 6 different kinds of goblins and 6 different kinds of gnolls and just a lot of different creatures of the same kind of grouping, but just different types. They got more powerful. And minions were another thing I did like too, but that's for another video. So what happened if you got stung by this creature? So there's the bite, there's the swallow, and look at that. There is no poison on the Purple Worm. Imagine that. We don't see it at all. We got a bite. Clamping jaws, it can swallow you, but there's no sting. They took that very classic thing away, and I didn't like. So that I think is generally a nerf to this creature. I would have liked to have seen the Purple Worm poison for this creature. Now the second creature that we talked about was the Wyvern, the next creature. That was the Wyvern, and there was no giant wasp or giant hornet in 4th edition either. There were some creatures that were taken away. So we got the purple worm and the wyvern, but in this edition we didn't get that other creature. So the wyvern did have a sting. It was plus 15 versus AC, had a reach of 2, which means that it had a reach. And the wyvern makes a secondary attack against the same target, plus 13 against fortitude, and 10 ongoing poison save ends. So this is a nerf from 1st and 2nd edition where you're dead to 10 ongoing poison damage, which probably is going to do 10 or 20 points of damage at the most, because you got a 50% chance to save. I think that was the last. Nope. Okay, that was the last one of those. So that was 4th edition. Now we're going to talk about 5th edition and 5.25 or 5.24. So this is the player's handbook. No, this is the Dungeon Master's Guide. This is the new Dungeon Master's Guide, and it really didn't change. Here is the description of poisons. There's contact, ingestion, inhaled, and injury. They just give the general description of what each one of those are. And then there is a list of poisons below. And there's a hyperlink with each one. So if we go to Oil of Taggart, it says a creature subjected to this poison must succeed on a DC 13 Constitution saving throw or become poisoned, which was a condition, for 24 hours, and the poison creature is also unconscious. Pale Tincture, DC 16 Constitution saving throw and take 1d6 poison damage and become poisoned. And the poison creature must repeat the saving throw every 24 hours, taking 1d6 poison. So you can see poisons got very nerfed from 1st edition all the way to 5th edition. Purple worm poison. Subject creature to this poison must make a DC 19 Constitution saving throw or take 12d6 damage on a failed save, half as much on a successful one. So, yes, now it is tied to this poison condition, which gives you disadvantage on attack rolls. And it is also tied to damage, which I didn't necessarily like. Staff of the Adder. Here it is from the new Dungeon Master's Guide. As a bonus action, you can turn the head of the staff into an animate venomous snake. When you attack, you make an attack roll, which has a reach of 5 feet. You add your proficiency bonus and your wisdom modifier to the attack roll. Boy, did they change this from 1st edition till now. On a hit, the target takes 1d6 piercing damage, and it just flat out took 3d6 poison damage, not instant death. So that is a huge change. I feel that the mechanic from 1st edition to 5th edition changed dramatically, and it changed to just damage, and it wasn't great damage, and it wasn't deadly damage, and it wasn't a kind of nasty saving throw. Still based off of saving throw, but the effect, I think, got nerfed pretty massively. And just looking at these different items and creatures, you can see that. So here's our giant wasp from the monster manual. And again, it does a sting. It's only got a sting now. It doesn't have a bite attack. It's only got a sting attack. And it does some damage. And the target must make a DC 11 Constitution saving throw, which is a joke. That's a joke. Most creatures can make that. They've got more than most PCs have more than a 50% chance to make that saving throw. Or they take 3d10 poison damage on a failed save and half as much on a successful one. If the poison damage reduces the target to 0 hit points, the target is stable but poisoned for an hour. So no permanent paralysis, no paralysis for hours, and no chance of death, essentially, other than you're taking some damage, which is very easy to mitigate. So that's a huge nerf. The purple worm, tail stinger, DC 19 Constitution saving throw, and for creatures, for PCs that are 15th level, because this is a challenge rating 15, even if they're 12th level, a DC 19 Constitution saving throw is pretty easy to make. I would say most PCs are going to have a 50% or better chance of making that saving throw. If they fail, they take 12d6 damage and half as much on a successful. That's a complete nerf. Now, we saw in 4th edition that the purple worm didn't have a sting at all, but they put the sting back in 5th edition, but it's a complete nerf to the attack. You know, no, like 3rd edition, it was dex damage or strength damage. And in first and second edition, it was death. Those are things that PCs are very afraid of and builds a lot of tension. But this, 12d6 damage, it builds a little tension when you pick those dice up. But if you had a group that played first edition and somebody died, and then compare that to this, that same group play against a purple worm in each edition, first and second edition, they're going to say that creature was super scary. It was less scary in third edition, not necessarily completely scary in fourth edition, and not scary at all. I mean, it's still a scary creature in fifth edition, but it could be scarier. And finally, we're going to talk about the Wyvern. It's got his sting. It does 2d6 plus 4. Target must make a DC 15 Constitution saving throw. That's easy for 6th level characters to make. Or take 76 poison damage, half as much on a successful saving throw. Again, if I took a group of PCs and had them go up against a first edition Wyvern, a second edition Wyvern, a third edition Wyvern, a fourth, and a fifth edition Wyvern, they would say the fifth edition Wyvern is probably the least scary, whereas the first and the second one is very scary and adds a lot more tension to the group. So, in summary, we have talked about all these different ways that the mechanics of poison have been changed from first to fifth edition, and in my opinion, it's been nerfed pretty massively. Now, I don't know a lot of players that like to see their characters die, but it should be something that does happen every once in a while, or the threat of it should be there, and so players should know, like right off the bat, poison is very deadly. We all knew when we were playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons in 2nd edition that poison was extremely deadly, and you needed to deal with that very fast. You needed to have ways of dealing with it immediately. The magic items have changed, as we saw, and the creatures have changed pretty dramatically, as we saw. I think they made things get easier. 5th edition does feel like it is an easier version of the game compared to earlier editions, but it is what it is. All right, that is our poison video. I hope everybody enjoyed, and I will catch everybody